Hey, let's talk about a topic you've probably been getting wrong for as long as you've been in aviation. Don't worry, we're going to fix it today, and let me say right up front, it's not your fault. It's a common mistake that a lot of pilots make because your CFIs taught it to you wrong. And it's not their fault, although it is their responsibility to get it right. You see, most CFIs get their tickets at a towered airport, and they think non-towered airports are uncontrolled airports, and they're not. So let's go over it. Hey, before we do anything, click like and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. This is a towered airport. We can tell because the airport symbol is blue, and towered airports always sit in controlled airspace. There may be an exception here or there, but for a general rule, a towered airport with a blue symbol is in controlled airspace. Now that might be Delta airspace or Charlie airspace or Bravo airspace, but it's just controlled airspace. Now this is a non-towered airport, and we can tell that because the airport symbol is magenta. For those of you who watched Blue's Clues as a kid, magenta, cyan, you got it. A non-towered airport is magenta on the map, but it sits in uncontrolled airspace. This is where the confusion comes in. Just because a non-towered airport sits in uncontrolled airspace doesn't in any way suggest that the airport is uncontrolled. That's not true at all. There are very distinct and definite controls that are both recommended by the FAA and regulated by the FAA. Keep that in mind if you can. There's no such thing as an uncontrolled airport anywhere in the United States. Now, a lot of people will get this wrong because they say, well, the AIM, the Aeronautical Information Manual, tells us how to conduct ourselves at a non-towered airport, but that's just advisory. It's not regulatory, which is partially true. That's not regulatory, but there is case law that in the absence of a regulation, the AIM becomes regulatory. But that's beside the point. The FAA does give us specific guidance in that book telling us how to behave. The FAA also put out Advisory Circular 90-66 Charlie. It's a recent upgrade from the old version, Bravo. It's better. It's a little thick, but there's some great information in there. The graphics are much improved, and it really does make it clear to us that how we operate in a non-towered airport environment in uncontrolled airspace is very much a regulated activity. And since we're talking about regulations, let's get right to it with the specific regulation that pertains to non-towered airports in uncontrolled airspace. Specifically, the FAA calls it operating in the vicinity of non-towered airports in Gulf airspace, which is uncontrolled. What 91.126 tells us is that when we're operating at a non-towered airport, we must enter a left-hand traffic pattern for the intended runway, unless that airport has an established right-hand traffic pattern, in which case we enter a right-hand pattern. Now this is where people get screwed up over the years because they think, well, I can be on a 10-mile final and I'm number one because I'm on final and the regulations say whoever's on final has priority. Well, no, that's not the way that works. You could be on a 10-mile final, there's no rule against that, but you're not in the pattern. And if it's visual meteorological conditions and you're flying VFR, you are not in the pattern, you do not have the right of way. You have to break off your approach and join the pattern, or hope that there's a space that you can get in without interrupting the pattern. The same is true if you're on a practice IFR approach, or for that matter, an actual IFR approach in IMC. If you break out into VFR conditions and there's traffic in the pattern flying VFR, you got to turn that into a circling approach. You can't just bust into a VFR pattern saying, well, I'm IFR, because the student pilots don't know what you're talking about. Many of the private pilots who don't have instrument ratings have no idea what you're doing, and that makes this a less safe environment. When you get right down to it, that's the whole point. How do we have safer flying conditions, especially in potentially congested places like a traffic pattern, and specifically a non-towered airport traffic pattern where nobody is directing you to an active runway? You have to make that determination on your own. So read the NOTAMs, be familiar with what's going on at the airport, have the weather information so you know the appropriate runway, and read the chart supplement for that airport because they may have a preferred runway during certain times of the year or certain meteorological conditions. For instance, low or light or calm winds. They may identify a specific runway to use. Just keep in mind, when you're operating into a non-towered airport, that is not an uncontrolled airport. And here's the thing that really caps it off. If you were to do something wrong and paint were to get swapped or metal were to get bent, the FAA, while a concern, and the NTSB, who will be investigating, those are things you're going to have to worry about and interact with and maybe even go to a hearing. But they're not your big problem. Your big problem is your insurance company. Yeah, insurance. Remember, insurance is a contract for payment. If you're my insurance company, you set a premium, and as long as I pay you that premium on time and follow all the rules, you'll cover me if something goes wrong. But if I don't follow all the rules, if I violate 91.3 and I didn't become familiar with everything about my flight, if I violate 91.13 and I operate in a careless and reckless manner, and remember, we don't decide if it's careless or reckless, the observer decides if it's careless or reckless. And finally, if we violated 91.126, how to operate in a non-towered airport environment in Class Golf airspace, our insurance company is going to send us a very polite letter that says, since you violated at least these 3 regulations, it's the same as if your airplane was out of annual or you hadn't done your flight review. We're not going to cover that. All losses are now up to you. So please, take this to heart, and I encourage you to check it out yourself. Go look at the AIM. Go look at 91.126. Go look at Advisory Circular 90-66 Charlie and see for yourself, how do you officially get into a non-towered airport? How do you get out of it the way the FAA wants us to? Because if you're doing everything the way the FAA said, you're covered. Mama said to do it this way, I'm doing it that way. So what do you think? Did you learn something? I hope so. Let me know down in the comments whether you agree or you disagree. If there's an exception at your airport, or if you just think I'm flat out wrong, and I'm not, go ahead and let me know. Hey, do me a favor and click that like button because the YouTube algorithm really likes that, and I'll like you if you do that. You could also subscribe to the channel, and then you'd be notified whenever we upload new material. And we upload new material about flight training, ground school, and aviation lifestyle every week. So come back and see us sometime, and we'll be right here on your personal device whenever you're ready.